Summer can be a bit of a slog. For us, it's often for some reason a rather busy time, and I'm sure we're not alone.
Well, you can beat the summertime sadness and the August angst and enhance your everyday with our excellent sponsor, Via Hemp. This is a company that crafts award-winning premium THC and THC-free gummies.
Each of these gummies is especially designed to cultivate a specific mood. Whether you're looking to get relaxed, get quality sleep, get creative, or just to get focused. If you're 21 or older, you can experience it for yourself and get 15% off your first order with our exclusive code MSheet at viahemp.com. That's VIIAHEMP.com.
I personally enjoyed their grapefruit flow state gummies. This CBG and CBD powerhouse really helped me tap into my productivity. Like, we have had an extremely busy summer, and I feel flow state got me over the finish line a few times when I was editing multiple episodes a day, digging through documents, and knocking out a bunch of interviews.
Via Hemp does not require a medical card, and it ships legally to all 50 states. It's also affordable, and even more so for Murder Sheet listeners who get a special deal.
If you're 21 and older, head to viahemp.com and use code MSheet to receive 15% off. That's VIIAHEMP.com and use code MSheet at checkout. After you purchase, they ask you where you heard about them. Please support our show and tell them we sent you. Enhance your everyday with Via.
Temp check. What kind of summer are we having this year? A family road trip summer? A beach bum summer? Or a wake me up when the sun sets summer? With Instacart, choose your own adventure and skip the shopping side quests. Where available, you can get ice cream delivered to your hotel, sunscreen to the pool, or cold brew to your bed. Well, door, in as fast as 30 minutes. Wherever you find yourself this summer, you can get the goods. Download Instacart for free delivery on your first 3 orders. Offer valid for a limited time. Minimum $10 per order. Excludes restaurants. Additional terms and fees apply.
Okay, it's time to commit. 2024 is the year for prioritizing yourself. Begin your new smile journey with Byte, and you could start seeing results in just 2 to 3 weeks. Just order your at-home impression kit today for only $14.95 at Byte.com. Byte clear aligners are doctor-directed and delivered to your door. Treatment costs thousands less than braces. Plus, they offer financing options, accept eligible insurance, and you can pay with your HSA FSA. Get 80% off your impression kit when you use code WONDERY at Byte.com. That's BYTE.com. Start your confidence journey today with Byte.
Content warning, this episode includes discussion of the murder of 2 girls.
So, since the last time we've spoken with you, there has been a rash of new filings in the cases associated with Richard Allen. And I say cases because some of the filings relate to the contempt hearing that's coming up on Monday, and other filings relate more directly with the murder charges against Richard Allen. And in addition to that, there have also been a number of letters inexplicably sent to the court by some YouTubers. And we will discuss it all with you as best we can.
My name is Anya Kane. I'm a journalist.
And I'm Kevin Greenlee. I'm an attorney.
And this is The Murder Sheet.
We're a true crime podcast focused on original reporting, interviews, and deep dives into murder cases.
We're The Murder Sheet.
And this is the Delphi murders, a flurry of defense filings.
So let's start by talking very briefly about the letters. Gary Bodette, who is known online by his YouTube persona, Fig Solves. He, of course, was named as Filings last week, in which it was suggested he may have been working in some fashion with Nick McClelland, and that was based on screenshots from Mr. Baudet, in which Mr. Baudet perhaps was suggesting that. I have not seen the screenshots, but I think that seems to be the implication. Subsequent to that, Mr. Baudet and another YouTuber named Frank Wesseling wrote letters to the judge, which have subsequently been entered into the court file, the case file, if you will. And frankly, I don't think these letters amount to much. I don't think they're going to have a great deal of significance.
Word salad, both of them.
And I also think that when you look at them, it seems to indicate that the people who wrote these letters may not really understand the role of the judge in our criminal court system. They seem to be under the impression that the judge is like a teacher that you tattle to, or they seem to think that the judge is someone who is going to put on a deerstalker cap and grab a magnifying glass and go out and personally investigate things. I say this because Mr. Baudet says he sent a link to the judge to a Google Drive, which he says has all sorts of information about other people in it. Those are not the things a judge does. The role of a judge is to apply the law. She is not a fact finder. She is not an investigator.
In addition to that, I mean, just it seems like with Mr. Baudet's letter, it was initially emailed to Carroll County, Georgia. So there seems to be a lot of confusion and scrambling with some of these YouTubers. And yeah, as you said, it's not really clear what these letters clarify, because they're both written in such a way that quite unclear. A lot of the, like, I don't know. I sometimes feel that there's been a YouTubification of this case, where you have YouTubers with relatively small platforms who have, nonetheless, because of their willingness to insert themselves into cases, an outsized influence. Obviously, I think anybody who cares about this case or other high-profile cases in the future should be somewhat concerned about that, because I don't think it's going to end with Delphi. There are too many incentives to do things like this because it gets eyeballs on you.
Yes. And it's troubling. It's troubling because we are not in a position to know the truth or falsity of what the defense is suggesting may be the relationship between Mr. Baudet and law enforcement, or Mr. Baudet and prosecutor Nick McClelland. But at the very least, because of Mr. Baudet's words and some things and some of his screenshots and such, he's created a situation where he plausibly can be accused of receiving information that should be kept private. He's in a situation where he could plausibly be accused of sending lots of information to the prosecutor. He's in a situation where it could be suggested that he's acting at the behest of the prosecutor when he posts certain things.
Okay, I'm going to tell you my own personal opinion. This is based on our own interactions with Mr. Baudet. And of course, I could be wrong, would be open to evidence pointing against my theory here. But I tend to think that the defense is vastly over-exaggerating the contact between him and McClelland. I think that can be very much true. And I think that from what I know about Mr. Baudet, this was likely unsolicited one-way street stuff where he's sending in tips that may not even be super relevant to the prosecution. And so I think this is the defense essentially saying, but they did it too, regarding leaking and not really necessarily having the facts to back that up. That's what it strikes me as, a bit of a desperate gambit on their part. That being said, if what the defense is sort of insinuating happens to be on the money, which again, I very much doubt. But if what they're saying is basically true and that Nick McClelland has been prolifically leaking to a YouTuber for reasons unbeknownst to anyone, then that's the kind of thing that could get a case thrown out. So the idea that a YouTuber could get a case thrown out is just, I mean, the idea that that's not a 0% possibility is disturbing. I don't think it's going to come to that because I think the defense is just, let's be honest. The defense has a history of overstating their points sometimes. They don't hold back. They don't say, like, let's make this as perhaps as accurate as possible. They say, let's make this sound as crazy as possible. That's been their strategy this whole time. That's what they're doing. That's not a criticism. That's just what I've observed. So I tend to think that this is blown out of proportion. Both defense and prosecution are allowed to receive tips and communications with other people who are outside of the case. They just can't treat it as a two-way street and then give information to those people. So I tend to think that this is likely in that category. And again, that's just based on our own dealings with Mr. Beaudet. But if it's not, if the defense is, again, on the money, then it's like one of those things that could have a huge impact. But I just don't think it's there.
In fairness to the defense, if what you're saying is true and Mr. Beaudet's interactions with Prosecutor McClelland and others has been exaggerated, it is worth noting that the first person to exaggerate those interactions was not Andrew Baldwin. It was not David Hennessy. It was not Brad Rosie. The first person to exaggerate those interactions would have been Gary Beaudet himself.
That is fair.
And so he created a situation which the defense and the prosecution and now all of us
it's interesting because you have people like this who, in the case of like Angela Sedlowski, Courtney Parsons, YouTubers like who are virulently pro-defense. I think some have argued that what they do actually hurts the defense's cause because they're claiming access, they're claiming all this, that they're in touch with the defense and people are essentially like, that makes it look like they're leaking to you. What's wrong with you? And Fig Gary finds himself in somewhat of a similar situation. So it's like, we hurt the things we love. If you kind of treat this like a football game and treat it like this is your team, then when you don't really have any of the skill sets necessary to treat it with any sort of like confidentiality or professionalism, then you end up, interestingly enough, probably most likely hurting whatever side that you are advocating for. I don't think anybody who's like a fair-minded adult in this wants to see either side derailed by nonsense.
No.
Because that's not good for the case. That's not fair to Richard Allen, and it's not fair to the victims' families. So, the fact that this is happening, again, is surreal.
Yeah, and I think it's worth knowing there are people in certain camps, and they try to act as if everybody else is in camps as well. We have at times been accused of being pro-prosecution. Other times we've been accused of being pro-defense. We did an episode, I believe, last week mentioning the Beaudet stuff and talking about our interactions with Beaudet. And because of that, I've seen people online saying Murder Sheet's very well known to be very, very pro-defense.
We're famous for it.
And then there are other people out there who say Murder Sheet is violently biased towards the prosecution, is very anti-defense.
I want these people to all get together and fight each other. Do a rumble.
You're talking about the commenters, not the prosecution and defense.
Yeah, although frankly, that would some of the breakdown of relations in this case almost indicates that both might happen. But yeah, it's stupid.
My bias is I want there to be a fair trial for Richard Allen. That's what I want. I want the process to work as it should, so that the evidence for and against Mr. Allen can be weighed and a verdict can be reached that reasonable people can have confidence and faith in.
Amen.
That's my bias. That is what I want. And so at times, if I think something that the defense is doing jeopardizes that, we might criticize that. If there are times that we think something the prosecution or a fan of the prosecution is doing that might jeopardize that, we will question that. So that is our bias. That is where we are coming from.
I'm going to at some point do a episode, I think, about the fandom of true crime and how we've really gone too far. Like, it's great to be a fan of a talented musical artist. It's great to be a fan of a television show that's fictional or even non-fictional. There's a lot of things that it's wonderful to be a fan of, but being a fan of one party or another in an ongoing murder case is not healthy, in my opinion. I love the people in our social media groups and whatnot who kind of say like, I have an opinion, but I'm that's based on my own opinion, and that's fine. Like, people can have an opinion. I think Alan's guilty. I think Alan's innocent. That's great. People are allowed that. I also love it when people say, listen, I have questions and I'm going to be interested to see what happens at trial. Like, all of those people who are sort of behaving normally with their opinions or their lack thereof, then that's all great. But when people take it to this really like almost tying their identity to their fandom over, again, one side of an ongoing murder case, then there's something very toxic about that. And we've seen that proliferate on YouTube. We've seen that proliferate on different social media sites. And it's not healthy. It's not good. I don't think it's healthy for those individuals, frankly, but more importantly, it's not healthy for the case that you have such virulent rhetoric, such just bizarre antics. And it encourages the kind of behavior, I think, that you don't want to see. You don't want to see. I also don't feel like our criminal justice system is really equipped to deal with any of this. And, I think there's like this online onslaught. I've always said that this case is the real world versus the internet. And right now, the internet may be winning if there's going to be like, YouTubers writing, bizarre letters to the judges. I mean, it's just like, it's all just a bad omen. You don't want to see this.
You don't want to see
I mean, like, again, and we say that like we're podcasters, we're new media. We try to handle this as responsibly as possible. We're not getting out here and saying Richard Allen is innocent or Richard Allen is guilty. We're just telling you about the filings. We're doing reports when we get them. Like, that's how we're trying to handle it. We're not trying to put our thumb on the scale. I mean, as Kevin said, we're just biased in this whole, in the sense that we want the whole thing to just work out. And when it's not working out, we're going to say something.
And if someone does something to threaten the fairness of the trial in that process, whether that someone is Andrew Baldwin or Nick McClelland or Judge Gold or Gary Baudet, we're going to call them out.
Yeah, we're going to say something. I mean, I don't think we'd be serving our audience by being like, this is fine, this is good, because it's not. It's just ridiculous. The whole thing has become such a three-ring circus, and, people can get upset with us about saying, well, this is clownery, but if we think it is, we're going to say that, regardless of what quote unquote side it is, because it shouldn't be about that at this point. And people who, again, are so invested in one side, I think that's something to question. Like, is that clouding your judgment in terms of how you're behaving online or what you're doing in the case? I think people need to ask themselves those questions. If you don't feel like it's rising to that level, then you're probably fine. If you feel like it is, then I don't know.
This episode is sponsored by AutoTrader. Credit scores, down payments, interest rates. Car buying can be a numbers game, but you don't have to be a math expert to get the keys to your dream car. Just use Kelley Blue Book My Wallet on AutoTrader. Crunch your numbers and get your personalized results so you know exactly how much you'll pay each month for your car. It's like having a magic wand for your wallet. Presto, the car you've been wanting is now within reach. So hit the road and leave your calculator at home. Find your next car on autotrader.com.
What makes a life a good one? Is it the adventure you have? Or the friends you find along the way? Maybe it's pursuing your passion while striving to protect, defend, and save what you believe in every single day. So, what makes a life a good one? In the Coast Guard, we think it's all of the above and more, but you'll have to find out for yourself. Visit gocoastguard.com to learn more.
You've worked hard to build your brand, so why settle for one-size-fits-all branded clothing? Lands' End Outfitters creates apparel your employees will truly want to wear that unites your team in comfort and style. It's why Lands' End Outfitters has been a branded apparel supplier to some of the world's most respected brands for more than 30 years. From logo polos to fully customized branded wardrobes, our world-class outfitters will partner with you to help your team feel confident on the job and put your brand into action, all backed by above and beyond expertise. See why Lands' End Outfitters should be your branded apparel partner. Go to business.landsend.com/pod20 and use code POD20 for 20% off your first product. That's business.landsend.com/pod20. Code POD20 for 20% off your first product.
So let's move on and talk about the filings in the case that were actually made by attorneys. The first one is a doozy. Sorry to use that legal term, but it is a doozy.
Wow, is that the original Latin?
It's a motion to compel and request for sanctions. This is filed by the defense. Very briefly, they're indicating that we believe there's some evidence that should be handed over to us that hasn't been handed over to us. That's what the motion to compel is, make them hand it over to us. And then the request for sanctions, I think that is something I want to highlight really hugely, another legal term, hugely, right here at top. The defense recently filed a motion for a speedy trial. We want this trial to happen within 70 days. So I'm mentioning that because in this request for sanctions, the sanction is, well, if the trial gets delayed, who should you blame it on? Don't blame it on us, blame it on the state. So they are already contemplating the possibility that the trial will not happen in May.
Or even indicating that, from what I'm reading here, their request is that sanctions be in the form of...
Let's talk about this.
Yeah.
So they're saying if the trial is delayed because we haven't gotten this evidence, which we'll discuss the evidence in a moment. If the trial is delayed because we haven't gotten this evidence, the time should be charged against the state. The delay should be credited to the state and not to us. What does that mean? Well, the rule for a speedy trial indicates that it's complicated, but if you file a request for a speedy trial and then that trial doesn't happen within a certain time frame, is the delay in the trial caused by the defense? If it is, well, there you go. Not much you can do about it. But if the delay in the so-called speedy trial is caused by the state, at some point there are remedies for that, up to and including the defendant being released from custody and charges being dismissed. So they're saying, we're asking for all this stuff. If the production of this stuff causes the trial to be delayed, blame it on the state, and then maybe the delay will be so big that Richard Allen has to be released or the charges dismissed.
To me, this document, for all its 18 pages, that is the most important thing within this document, that sort of final point of what they're essentially requesting.
They say that at the top and at the bottom.
Yes. And I think that, to me, that's the point of this. Frankly, the whole thing also calls into question even the strategy of speedy trial. I think this is an indication that is not going to happen for what, because the people who are asking for it are saying essentially that, well, when this inevitably doesn't happen, when we inevitably say that we're not, we haven't gotten all the discovery, we're going to ask for a continuance, but don't blame us. So, I don't think May's going to happen. I think May is out the window. I could be wrong, but that's just how
I hope you are.
I hope I'm wrong, but I don't, this is not a filing by people who expect to go to trial in May. I'm sorry. And I think that it mostly seems like it makes the speedy trial request, frankly, just look like maybe another desperate gambit to remove Richard Allen from incarceration. If for some reason Judge Gull aligns with us on this, maybe we have the chance to get him out. I don't know. The rest of it to me, and we'll go into the points, but the rest of it to me reads a bit like, with some new additions, a grocery list of grievances that the defense has brought up in the past about the prosecution. What one thing that's kind of been notable about the defense is, nothing is ever, I think, adjudicated to their satisfaction. They will kind of include the same thing again and again and again in filings.
It's also interesting to me that a lot of this document is them saying, we haven't received certain bits of evidence, and we don't even know if that evidence exists. we're guessing that it does. We have a hunch that it does. We have an educated...
We have the vibe that it exists.
But we haven't gotten it. Therefore, the state may be doing something nefarious.
It just seems odd to me at this point, at this stage, that they're, because here's the thing. So they're going through and saying, we don't have this, but shouldn't they have done this? But the state's saying they don't have it and that it doesn't exist. But we'd like it. So why doesn't it exist? The reasoning here, I'm not really fully following it.
But in some cases, they're saying the state hasn't even told us whether something exists or doesn't exist.
And that's reasonable then to be pushing on that. But other things they're saying, the state has responded saying, we don't have this. But I think it does speak to a breakdown in trust between the sides that we've discussed before. Since the leak, you get the sense from the court filings that relations have really soured. Appears that McClelland is only communicating with them via email so as to make sure everything is put in writing and can't be twisted around. It seems like they're saying, we don't believe McClelland when he says that he doesn't have these things because, what if he's lying? And it's I don't know, the whole thing is kind of has that tone of it. Almost a paranoia of maybe they're lying, maybe they hid it. I don't, it just kind of but then again, when things are that bad, how much of this is based on reality and how much is it based on, paranoia of stuff must be deleted. If they had evidence of we believe he deleted this because of this, it made sense when they were talking about Brad Holder's interview getting taped over because they were saying that interview is referenced in these other documents and we don't have it. And then they learn it was taped over. So that makes sense when you're making a big deal about that because you say there was a thing, it existed, now it doesn't. In those same filings when they were talking about that, they also had, frankly, the less compelling point of also, Patrick Westphal was interviewed, and that must have been taped over. And then it came out that, no, he was never interviewed on tape. They talked to him, and it wasn't recorded. Nothing can be destroyed if it never existed.
Yes.
So this kind of document flits in between those two things a lot. And frankly, in some cases, in my opinion, conflates them. And they're two different issues.
Yeah, you bring up the Odinism and the Brad Holder interview getting recorded over. And that brings up an interesting issue. In this document, they say there are several things related to Odinism and the Odinism investigation by the state that we did not receive until after the depositions we took in August. And it was in those depositions that essentially we made it clear to the state that Odinism was going to be a big part of our defense strategy. And then after we did that, then they turn over all this Odinism stuff for us. And they say, why did they wait? Why did they wait? If I could speculate. So when you have a major case like this, the state gets all sorts of crazy leads. They also get some good leads, but they get crazy leads. And they also get leads for things that might sound interesting, and then they investigate, and the state comes to the conclusion there's nothing to this. So you don't necessarily, as the prosecutor, have to turn over every single tip you get. If someone calls the police and say, this crime was committed by Bigfoot, you don't have to send that over to the defense. And if you investigate leads and you are satisfied that in your mind there's nothing about this lead that is relevant to the prosecution or defense of this case, you can make the determination, I don't think I need to send this over. So to speculate, I might guess that it was possible that McClelland and the state did not send over the Odinism stuff because they had investigated it and concluded this was a bum lead. There's nothing here. But then once the depositions happen and they realize, oh, this is going to be a big part of their defense, therefore we should send it all over to them. Then they did. So that would be my speculation as to what might have caused the initial delay in sending the Odinism leads and then the flurry of Odinism leads sent to the defense after the depositions.
Yeah, the defense wants to make it out to be that this is such a good lead that they hid it from us, and the obvious, and the counterpoint would be that the prosecution just looked into it. It kind of went nowhere, like many of the thousands of tips that they got, and did not consider it to be one of the main investigatory tracks. Now, obviously, you have men like Todd Click, Kevin Murphy, and Greg Ferenczi who were looking into it on the side, but it's not really clear to me. When you have a large investigation with multiple agencies, I do think some of those side tracks can kind of go on, but it doesn't seem like there was ever really like probable cause where they were able to make much happen there. And so the defense is very much within its rights to go with a theory like that, but it's not necessarily sinister or crazy for the prosecution to not feel like there was much to it and not really prioritize a lot of that. I mean, a lot of the defense's complaints about the prosecution and law enforcement throughout this strike me as like, you don't agree with us. Isn't that crazy? Isn't that wild? And it's like, maybe they just don't think the Odinism theory is very good because there wasn't a lot of evidence to follow. I mean, that's, kind of dressing everything up as a conspiracy sort of at some point becomes a bit repetitive.
There's talk in here about geofencing and have they turned over all the information they have about the phones from people who were said to be in the area. They indicate that they are in possession of a map prepared by someone indicate they're in possession of a map which was prepared by someone on the state side of things, which indicates these are people whose phones were there, and none of those people, according to the defense, had any association with Richard Allen. Certainly, if there's more evidence about the geofencing, the defense is entitled to it. But it may be worth noting that Richard Allen, by his own account, indicates that he was in that area and was using his phone. I believe he was looking at stocks that day.
A stock ticker. So he puts his own phone at the scene. Now, reading through this document, are they saying that his phone is actually not picked up on the geofencing?
Well, one thing that they do say is, I'm going to read paragraph 38. Again, specifically, someone prepared a map which tracked the February 13th, 2017 afternoon movements of multiple phones in and around the place where the victims were ultimately found the following day. Particularly, some of these movements appeared to have occurred between 3:02 p.m. and 3:27 p.m., either at the scene where the victims were ultimately found on February 14th, 2017, or within 60 to 100 yards from the site, and none of the phones or people associated with the phones have any affiliation with Richard Allen. If I'm reading that correctly, it is suggesting that Richard Allen's phone was not in the vicinity of the crime scene between 3:02 and 3:07.
Although it's not explicitly saying that, it's saying could it be just saying nobody had anything to do with him? Is there? That's not really saying he's not there.
None of the phones or people associated with the phones have any affiliation with Richard Allen.
Okay, I guess maybe they're saying the phone wasn't there. And why would he say that?
They're saying the phone wasn't there from 3:02 on.
Could have been feasibly on his phone at 3:01, but had it turned off? Is that what we're reading into that?
What it seems to be suggesting is that Richard Allen's phone was not in the vicinity of the crime scene between 3:02 and 3:27. It doesn't indicate what phones may have been within the vicinity of the crime scene even as late as 3:01. So this also gets down to the time of the crime, things of that.
Yeah, it's bizarre if he was saying that his phone was at the scene with him, that afternoon, and it's not appearing.
Again, I think the important thing here is they're talking about between 302 and 327.
Okay. Which is after the abduction.
The abduction, I believe, took place at 213.
Right. So I guess why are they honing in on that time?
Perhaps, if you want me to speculate, they're honing in on that time because that's the time frame where Richard Allen's phone is not present.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I hear what you're saying. Interesting.
I mean, most people would say, instead of saying, 302 and 327, they might say, between 3 and 330. Was Richard Allen's phone present at 3? Was it present at 2:55?
Or if for some reason, I don't know how geofencing works, but maybe like the geofencing is what is causing those timestamps, because it's like, here's what we could see at 302, here's what we could see at this time. Like that it's almost like that's the time when they're able to collect it from, like that's the time that the data is stamped for.
If there's experts in geofencing out there, please reach out to us, murdersheet@gmail.com. Another big item mentioned in here is the whole episode with the Purdue professor. They call it a debacle. This is the Purdue professor, Jeffrey Turco, who made some comments to investigators at some point about whether or not the sticks left at the crime scene were runes associated with Odinism.
Yes. So this is a kind of a very much a recurring complaint from the defense about how state police essentially hid this professor from them. Honestly, I've always found this a bit confusing because the defense cites a full transcript or a recording of the professor's interview that was seemingly turned over to them. So if authorities wanted to hide this man, why would they send them that? I guess I would want to. Frankly, I would be so curious to hear from Professor Turco himself, because when he was cited by the defense, it seemed like two small citations from a much larger interview. And I would be very curious if he feels that that was an accurate depiction of his opinions and words, and whether he's the man himself who could clear up, oh yeah, that was weird, they were kind of hiding me, versus there was some sort of scheduling error or some sort of miscommunication. He could shed a lot of light onto whether this was indeed a sinister attempt to, I guess, disappear him, versus some kind of more innocent explanation. But the fact that they keep on hammering on this guy in particular is interesting to me. I guess I read that when we were initially talking about him, his role in this is he allegedly said something to the effect of like, well, these could be runes. The sticks atop the bodies could be runes. And that's, certainly very interesting for the defense. That's what they're arguing. But I guess to me, there's a difference between could be runes and are runes. There's also a difference between could be runes and therefore a group of Odinists must have committed the ritual sacrifice. Honestly, when you look into this, there's not Odinist ritual sacrifices in general are not something that have like a precedent in the modern world. White supremacists committing murders, oftentimes political murders, do have a precedent, but not sacrificing white children. That's just not, and so going to a person who seemingly studies ancient Norse culture and runes doesn't, like, there are experts who might have a bit more to add with like modern day Odinism and like the white supremacist movement, frankly. We've talked to some of them on the show. They're great. But I feel like, I don't know. It's hard to know what to make of any of this. But what do you make of them continuing to bring it up constantly?
Sometimes I think I understand their point, and sometimes I'm confused. And I want to give you an instance of me being confused by reading paragraph 55. However, since getting back on the case, the defense has learned that Jerry Holman did in fact learn the identity of the Purdue professor Jeffrey Turco on August 12, 2023 through the Purdue Police Department, and Turco's identity was confirmed a few days later by other law enforcement. Holman even had possession of Turco's report, which contradicted Holman's August 10th, 2023 sworn testimony during the same time frame. If I'm reading this correctly, they're saying on August 10th, 2023, Holman seems to indicate he doesn't know the name of Turco. On August 12th, he does know the name. So therefore, since he knew the name 2 days after his testimony, he must have been lying 2 days earlier. Isn't it possible maybe Jerry Holman learns the identity of this professor on August 11th? Maybe he learns the identity of the professor on August 12th. How does him knowing a fact on August 12th prove that he also knew that fact 2 or 3 days earlier?
I didn't even pick that up, but yeah, that is a good question. It's hard to parse what they're getting. I mean, like, I know what they're getting at. We can't trust law enforcement or the prosecution because they've hid the ball in the past. That's what they're trying to make happen here. But I don't know if this incident necessarily reflects that. It seems to be ultimately, I just don't see what the significance of this is in the scheme of things, I guess.
And then they make a big deal. So Jerry Holman, of course, is one of the investigators for the Indiana State Police. He interviewed Jeffrey Turco, the professor. And then Holman prepares a report or a summary based upon that interview. And reading this filing, one thing is clear. It's clear that the defense has Holman's report, has his summary of the interview, and it also has a recording of the interview itself. And they try to suggest that because Holman summarized it in a way differently than we would have summarized it, and highlights points differently than we would have, this means he's lying. And I'm not sure if that follows, because if lying is an act of intentional deceit, and why would you intentionally deceive someone about the contents of an interview and then also supply them with the contents of that interview, a recording of that interview? I think it's possible that Holman and the defense attorneys, to give everyone the benefit of the doubt, they both look at things through different filters, and both of them would choose to highlight different things. But what is ultimately important is not Baldwin and Rosie's summary of the interview or Holman's summary of the interview. What's important is the recording of the interview itself.
I mean, and it also seems to me like I would want to see the entire transcript, because I mean, academics are known for hedging and saying, well, this is possible or plausible. I don't think, what I'm reading from Turco here is not, this is definitely an Odinistic sacrifice. It's allowing for the possibility as, well, in some poetic sources, people do sacrifices. Maybe if they were on, Google Books, they could have found that and done this. I mean, I don't know. It just, a lot of this just seems like a huge stretch on their part. And a lot of it seems to be like a difference of interpretation, which is not the same thing as a lie. And I would want to know, does as an academic, does Jeffrey Turco stand by what the defense is characterizing him as having said, that this must be an Odinistic sacrifice?
Then before we move on to the filings related to the contempt thing, there's at least one other section of this that really jumped out at me. And this is in paragraph 69. It's F, G, and H. And I'm going to read this. This is when they're discussing some of the things they want from the state. F. All of Derek German's law enforcement interviews, including video, audio, and or notes, reports memorializing any law enforcement interview. If he was never interviewed, the defense would ask for confirmation of that fact. G. For purposes of establishing a timeline, all of Kelsey German's phone dumps of all phones attributable to Kelsey German. If her phone was never collected, the defense would request confirmation of this fact. Furthermore, every law enforcement interview of Kelsey German, including video, audio, and or notes reports memorializing any law enforcement interviews. If she was never interviewed, the defense would ask for confirmation of that fact. H. All of Cody Patty's phone dumps of all phones attributable to Cody Patty. If his phone was never collected, the defense would request confirmation of this fact. Furthermore, of every law enforcement interview of Cody Patty, including video, audio, and or notes reports memorializing any law enforcement interviews. If he was never interviewed, the defense would ask for confirmation of that fact. So this certainly raises the possibility that is part of their defense strategy. They may choose to be blunt, they may choose to attack the family. It jumps out
or
at
at
me.
least go after them in some way.
It jumps out at me. They say, well, we want Kelsey's stuff, but we want that just to establish a timeline. That's all we're saying about Kelsey. We just want her information for the timeline. There's no such caveats when it comes to Derek German and Cody Patty. Derek German is, of course, the grieving father of Liberty German.
That'll be an interesting strategy if they do that. I mean, if they, on top of everything, I mean, obviously we're in a moment right now where they're facing contempt charges because the prosecution argues that they essentially allowed the leak of graphic crime scene photos of these two girls to get out onto the internet. So if they start also maybe trying to tie in the Patty family, the German family, with the Odinists, I imagine that would certainly add insult to injury for this family.
Yeah, I think this family has suffered enough.
Oh, yeah. I mean, they're gonna do whatever though. I think that is something that I picked up on too, that may be up their sleeve. They don't necessarily have to go down that path, but they can. And it sounds like they very well might. I will be, it's hard to assess some of this because the language that they use at all times is so extreme. And in the past, when they've done that, then sometimes it turns out to either the situation is not as they described or much more nuanced than they described. And therefore, it's hard for me to just necessarily take any of this at face value.
Certainly, the witness list for the contempt hearing includes names of people who've been very critical of the family.
That is true.
And in certain corners of the internet, there are some ridiculous and frankly offensive conspiracy theories alleging family involvement in this. So I don't know if they've been convinced of family involvement or what, or I don't know what's going on there, but I think it's worth highlighting.
I also think that it's worth saying that if there are no phone dumps of the family members in particular, that's not, I mean, if they weren't suspects from the jump, they're entitled to privacy. So like I wouldn't necessarily expect that their phones were like seized and gone through. That's not, again, just because your relative, your child, your sister is murdered does not mean that the police have the right to seize your phone. I mean, am I wrong there?
The police need probable cause, or the family member needs to volunteer or agree. When it comes to this case, all Derek German did was agree to pick up his daughter and Abby at the park, and then he was the one that initiated the search. So I don't know if it would have been necessary to go through his entire phone to get, there's no
or to download his phone. I mean, I think like going through it, like your hand over your phone and people swipe through it, then that's one thing. But like having all of your stuff downloaded, that's not necessarily something I would expect to happen unless there was a reason at some point to suspect Derek German's involvement.
Yeah.
Or he explicitly said, hey, here's my phone, download everything. I guess I'm just like, I just don't know if those things would exist.
Should we move on to the flurry of filings from David Hennessy?
Yes, and let me just say that from a PR standpoint, I think the timing of these was a mistake, because I think whenever you get a large filing from the defense, the headlines are, defense strikes back at prosecution, or defense says we didn't get everything, they're hiding the ball. And that's good for the defense. That furthers their narrative. That's a positive thing. But then essentially these were all like dumped out in the late afternoon last night, and it ended up frankly cannibalizing some of the coverage of the motion to compel and request for sanctions. So I don't know what they were thinking with that, but from a PR standpoint, that's, you got to give stuff air. Got to let it breathe a little bit and then do this, because otherwise you're just going to swamp everybody with this. And these were all filed by David Hennessy. The previous one was filed by Baldwin.
Let's talk about some of these filings. One is he is objecting to change of venue. So, again, this is important to be clear. These filings refer to the contempt hearing that is scheduled to take place on Monday. And that contempt hearing, now, the vast majority of hearings in this case have been conducted in Carroll County. For some reason, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't believe Judge Gold has made it clear, but for some reason, she's chosen to have this hearing at her court in Fort Wayne, in Allen County. And in this motion, Hennessy is basically saying, why are you doing that? This is a Carroll County case. It should be heard in Carroll County. Why do we have to go to Fort Wayne and Allen County?
Right. It's a fair question.
It's a very fair question. Maybe Judge Gold has an answer to that. I don't know. But I don't understand why the hearing is taking place in Allen County.
I don't either. But I think it is a fair question.
So in this motion, he's indicating he objects to this. And that's certainly his right.
In addition, each one of these is sort of picking at an aspect of the contempt hearing. So that includes the other parties. He filed a verified petition for recusal of prosecutor from contempt proceedings, as well as a verified petition for recusal from contempt proceedings for Judge Gull herself.
Let's talk about the prosecutor first. He brings up the fact that, as we've mentioned, Nick McClelland admits that by his account, he accidentally accessed an ex parte filing that the defense did. These ex parte filings should not have been seen by the prosecutor. And he says that was an innocent mistake. And this has given Hennessy an opening. Well, if you can make innocent mistakes and not immediately notify people of it, maybe you shouldn't be critical of Andrew Baldwin for making innocent mistakes, such as sending discovery information to the wrong person. And he further indicates that Nick McClelland is expected to be called as a witness in the contempt hearing. And he says if a person is being called as a witness, doesn't really make sense for them to be the prosecutor. So we need a different prosecutor for this.
Right. So even though McClelland is the one bringing the charges, he's saying basically someone else needs to take it over now.
Yeah. If McClelland is a witness, Mr. Hennessy writes that McClelland was present at unrecorded conferences with the court that impact his allegations and would be part of any evidence. So typically it would be unusual for a person to be a prosecutor and a witness.
Right. So that also seems like a fair concern to me. And now the judge, that's saying, this has an interesting paragraph, the one about the judge's recusal that ties back to the YouTubers that we mentioned earlier. Again, it pains us to discuss YouTubers on this program, but the second they're in court filings, they become relevant. So I feel like we're our hands are tied on this one because, again, when you're in a court filing, something happened and we need to talk about it.
You want to read paragraph 8?
Yeah. Defense counsel will be offering admissible evidence that Gary Baudet, aka Fig Solves, a person who has involved himself in this case on the internet, claimed to have received and disseminated confidential documents, and that his source for the documents was an employee of the court. Protesting too much, Mr. Baudet has now written a fawning letter to the court denying allegations that have not yet even been made. Under the circumstances, with the allegation of court involvement that will not go unsubstantiated, the court should not be ruling on the admissibility defense counsel's evidence regarding Mr. Baudet and his activities, much less assessing what value to give it.
Again, that frankly seems to me to be a very fair point. They're saying that because of Mr. Baudet saying my source is someone who worked for the judge, it doesn't make sense for the judge to be in charge of deciding what evidence should or should not be discussed or admitted in an investigation of her own staff. Right.
Well, and it also seems like whatever Mr. Baudet's intentions were with that letter,
Didn't
work, maybe made it worse, because basically it includes a lot of non-denial denials. Like, I don't currently have anybody who's a source in the judge's office. Well, that's not really what they're alleging. If it turns out that my suspicions are correct and that Mr. Baudet did not receive leaks from people affiliated with this case and was not really as sourced up as he claimed, I think this is going to go down as like just a massive headache on a lot of people's parts for nothing. And also maybe highlights for people in future cases for, if anyone's listening who's a prosecutor or a defense attorney or part of a judge's staff, that like, you don't need to engage with YouTubers. You just don't. It's too much of a risk. Unless they're doing something that really highlights them as the credible exception to the rule, getting into any sort of conversation with people who are basically passing on internet rumors is not worth your time.
And Mr. Hennessy also notes that Judge Gohl herself participated in different stages. Mr. Hennessy also notes that Judge Gohl has indicated already in statements her views of Baldwin and Rosie's actions in all of this. And so it could be suggested that she has essentially prejudged and already made up her mind about these allegations. So when you have someone who arguably has already formed conclusions, whether or not you believe those conclusions are right or wrong, and when you have that person also having someone on their staff being at least plausibly suggested to be sharing information with a YouTuber such as Mr. Baudet, in the interest of fairness, would it make sense to have a different judge evaluate the facts in this case? And again, I think that's a very fair point. What do you think?
Because I don't find Mr. Baudet's claims about being sourced up credible, and frankly, I believe a lot of them to be just outright exaggerations or even maybe fabrications. I think it's possible that he's talked to court staff. I think certainly, I imagine he has. I mean, he divulged to many people that he was in contact with McClelland. I just have a hard time believing that those professionals would leak anything to him. But that being said, the charges are serious. So like, I don't think it's true. And therefore I don't really think anything's going to come out of this, but, and therefore maybe I have a less of an issue with McClelland and, especially Gull more so staying on this. I still think that this has raised up enough of a hullabaloo I understand why they're asking for this. And I think maybe I'm a cautious person. So out of an abundance of caution, I would prefer it if people would recuse themselves.
Yeah. And we mentioned earlier in another context that our bias in this case is we want there to be a fair trial, a fair process, fair hearings to reach a result that we can all have confidence in. And I think, frankly, if someone has a staff member who's been accused of leaking is the arbiter, I'm sure that there are a lot of people out there who would have less confidence in the results of the hearing.
I just think when there's something so messy, it's just better to tackle it in as clean a way as possible. Now, I suppose we should talk about the motion for specific findings of fact and conclusions thereon. What does this mean? What are findings of fact?
Well, when Judge Gull threw them off the case back in October, she didn't issue any findings of fact. She just said, well, I think they're negligent. Actually, she didn't even say, I think they're negligent. She said, well, they're off the case. That was unexpected. See you guys next week, or whatever it was she said. And so the problem is, if you want to appeal something, you need to have a record that you can appeal from. And if there's no record, if you don't know why something has happened to you, if I just say, Anya, you're going to be sent to prison for a year. So long, Anya. How do you appeal that? How do you deal with that? If I say, Anya, you're being sent to prison for a year because of your persistent habit of stealing cereal boxes, then you can challenge that. It gives you something to challenge. So they're saying, whatever happens, judge, explain yourself.
Absolutely.
Explain your filings. Explain your findings, rather. Explain your findings.
Okay. And then finally, there's the motion to stay all ancillary proceedings and get this case to trial. Sure. So this is David Hennessy saying basically, let's just set aside this little contempt hearing situation until after the case is adjudicated. It's just going to delay things anyway. It would be a shame if things got delayed.
So those were the filings.
Yeah. Several different attempts to, get this off. They're obviously trying a lot of different strategies. Some of them seem pretty solid and well-founded. Others seem
less so.
Extremely less so. I think it's great to have a bunch of defense attorneys get up there and say, here's why this isn't contempt, or speak to their experiences potentially as expert witnesses. I don't think that a bunch of YouTubers with histories of completely unhinged behavior it carries the same weight, but I guess, I don't necessarily think the tendency to throw everything but the kitchen sink in is necessarily a good one, because I think you kind of end up clouding the good with the bad. But generally, it's possible that they won't even use some of those people, in which case I think it would be a stronger performance. Well, I think that's it for now. Can't wait for there to be 5 more filings by the time we're about to finish editing this, but we'll try to keep you posted as best we can. And just thanks very much for listening, and hopefully you find some of this discussion helpful.
Thanks so much for listening to the Murder Sheet. If you have a tip concerning one of the cases we cover, please email us at murdersheet@gmail.com. If you have actionable information about an unsolved crime, please report it to the appropriate authorities.
If you're interested in joining our Patreon, that's available at www.patreon.com/murdersheet. If you want to tip us a bit of money for records requests, you can do so at www.buymeacoffee.com/murdersheet. We very much appreciate any support.
Special thanks to Kevin Tyler Greenlee, who composed the music for the Murder Sheet, and who you can find on the web at kevintg.com.
If you're looking to talk with other listeners about a case we've covered, you can join the Murder Sheet discussion group on Facebook. We mostly focus our time on research and reporting, so we're not on social media much. We do try to check our email account, but we ask for patience as we often receive a lot of messages. Thanks again for listening.